It was about 5 years ago when I first met Linda, and they were working on the asbestos legislation, and she was literally knocking on the doors at Senator Specter's office and Senator Leahy's office, and they were saying, we don't care about your situation, we don't have time for that, get going, you don't have an appointment and everything. And I got to meet Linda, and I remember the first time that I really got to talk to her was in a cafeteria, in a Senate cafeteria. Jordan was there, Abe Brehe, who was the legislative guy from the Boilermakers, was there, Doug was there, and we're sitting there, and Linda's trying to get in, and quite honestly, I was in all those meetings, and I was thinking about it, I'd like to get out of some of these meetings. And Linda was sitting there in the cafeteria, and her beloved Alan was going through this with his awful disease that we all know too much about. And she was saying, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to have an asbestos awareness day, and I was thinking, and being polite, I was thinking, lady, you don't get it. You don't know how it works around here. Well, it's not the first time, but I'm the one that didn't get it. She is absolutely so tenacious, and this room filled with people just says it all on what she has put together and how she knocks on doors. She's known up on the Hill. She's a true advocate, and I'm just so proud of her. I'm just so proud of her for everything that she's done. And our circle, because of people like Linda, is getting much bigger. It's getting much bigger, and that's a tremendous thing. And before I go into my prepared remarks, and they're not going to be too long, but I think it'll be interesting. I want to acknowledge some other people that are very, very important. Dr. Robert Cameron, who's with the Pacific Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute out there at UCLA, another guy that works so hard for us all. Dr. Stephen Levin from Mount Sinai, Dr. Michael Harbert, Dr. Brad Black, Dr. Lemon, Dr. Miller, Dr. Castleman, Dr. Michael Johnson, and Dr. Heidi Roberts, who I had the pleasure of visiting with just Monday, as a matter of fact, and Dr. Heidi Kindler from Chicago, and also Dr. David Kugel, who has been involved with people that are sick for years and years and years. And also, people say, they can sit around, they can feel bad about their situations and everything. But because of people like Linda, Roger Worthington, T.C. McNamara, Doug Larkin, Paul Ziegelbaum, and our two newest friends, and here they come in the room again. I think we ought to give them another little round of applause, Shannon and Catherine. I was lucky and I got to meet your dad, and I'll tell you what, I am very, very proud to call him my friend, and there is not a doubt in my mind that he's not smiling down and so proud of you young ladies. And you really brighten up the room, let me tell you, because this is a tough subject for all of us. And then the last thing, that I want to say, and I see Dr. Black there, I hope I mentioned your name. Okay, good. So I jump around a little bit, but the last thing, and then we'll get on with this, My guys are here, Greg and our leaders, our union leaders from the Michigan area are here, and I've been talking to them, and I'm so glad they're here. And quite honestly, I didn't tell them I was speaking, so we made sure we locked them in so they'd come. If they heard I was speaking, that might have been a different story. But they're here, and I got to tell you, with the conversations that we've been having at the break time and everything, they're thoroughly impressed to be around these doctors and these advocates and everything, and it's just so important. It's just so important. So, having said that, let me get into this, and we'll go from there. I'm a third-generation asbestos worker. I want to let you all know how honored I am to be here. It is truly an honor and a privilege to represent the Asbestos Workers Union and speak at the 4th Annual Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization. Linda, thank you once again for having me stand in for Dr. Orris. The rate of mesothelioma deaths in the U.S. population in 2000 was 11 per million, including people with known exposure to asbestos. When Dr. Silikoff, who studied our insulators in Paterson, New Jersey, he found that our guys died of mesothelioma at the rate of 11 per 100. In layman's terms, that means that basically 1 in 10 or 10% of our membership who was exposed back in the earlier years are going to die from contracting mesothelioma. In the latest study of our members, the mesothelioma diagnosis rate has remained 1 in 10, and it was in Dr. Silikoff's study, it was the same as it was in Dr. Silikoff's study back in the 60s. And to those of you in attendance who have had your lives changed by asbestos disease, I want you to know that our union shares your hurt. It shares your heartache. No one has cried harder and longer than the families of the proud asbestos union workers over asbestos exposure and the terrible disease it causes. I'm an international vice president, serve our union as the political and legislative director. I'm also the health hazard administrator. Our union was established in 1904. Thus, over the years, we've been known as the pipe covers, the insulators, and the asbestos workers. We'll leave it go at that. We've been called other things, too. Since we don't apply asbestos to pipes and boilers anymore, we are now officially known as the International Association of Heat and Frost Insulators and the Allied Workers. Our union is one of the 13 crafts or trades that are affiliated with the National Building Trades, and we come under the umbrella of the National AFL-CIO. Other such trades would be the painters, electricians, pipe fitters, boiler makers, and plumbers, to name a few. When it comes to illness caused by asbestos exposure, our union has been at the forefront in working with organizations such as Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, Pacific Heart and Lung Blood Institute, and also MARF, and the good doctors who are trying to get their arms around this insidious disease that have decimated so many of our members and caused such grief to our families. Our union believes that there is no safe level of mesothelioma. Our union believes that there is no safe level of asbestos exposure. We now know that mesothelioma is a very aggressive cancer that can be caused by a very low doses of asbestos exposure. Some exposures as little as a few weeks or a month, or even less than that, as we unfortunately know. We believe that it is our moral obligation to work with others to help protect the laws and regulations that are in place to protect the unsuspecting public and the unsuspecting worker from needless and preventable asbestos exposure. We also believe that if procedures like the wet method experiment that was used in Fort Worth, Texas last December, or the outrageous proposal to burn asbestos-laden buildings in New Orleans are implemented, we will be facing an entire new generation of sick people from asbestos exposure. And we are committed to helping get a true asbestos ban bill in Congress, a bill that will prohibit the importation, manufacture, processing, or commercial distribution of asbestos-containing products. Any asbestos ban also must provide funding for the very important research. One of the things I want to say when this came up, and the terrible way that Senate bill was handled and everything, and Linda brought it to my attention, and she said, you know what, this is going on, where are you guys at that? My first question, my only question I had to know, where are the good doctors on that? Where's Dr. Harbaugh? Where's Dr. Black? Where's Dr. Levin on that? She told me that's where we're at. We stand with those good folks any day of the week, and we'll do whatever they want. So what do asbestos workers do? Today we do the same type of insulation work with products that do not contain asbestos. We insulate mechanical systems and powerhouses, both coal burning and nuclear, refineries, steel mills, factories, schools, hospitals, office buildings, and other high-rises. We also do the hazardous waste and asbestos removal on projects. So today's story is, today I would like to tell you a short story about our work with asbestos many decades ago, and how it is still affecting our families today. It is a story about a father, a spouse, some contemporaries, 2 daughters of our members. They each were exposed to asbestos in different ways, and each contracted mesothelioma, a devastating cancer whose only known cause in the United States is exposure to asbestos. Bill Glenn, he was the father of one of my partners, Brian Glenn, who was the business manager in Chicago. His dad, Bill Glenn, suffered from mesothelioma and worked on many different projects that contained asbestos, similar to the pictures we're about to see. This is actually a a boiler wall, and you see the insulator, and he's putting like three layers of asbestos on there. Commonwealth Edison has built some of the largest coal-fired powerhouses in the world. A single station would be much larger than the Kermanis Center Institute, which we are sitting in today. Typically, there would be one large boiler per unit, rising hundreds of feet in the air. This boiler would be covered with asbestos black and came in standard sizes of 18 inches wide and standard thicknesses from 1 to 6 inches. The black was typically 3 feet in length. The boiler would have to be completely covered with asbestos black. And these guys bang that black on and everything, got stuff all over them. It would be held on by pins, were welded by the boiler walls. Holes would have to be dug out with keyhole saws so that the black could be placed on the boiler walls. This was an extremely dusty process. Black would have to be cut and fabricated and pounded in place. All of the joints would then have to be covered with asbestos cement and would be mixed by hand. This was an extremely dusty process. The boiler walls were not covered with one layer of asbestos. Like I said, it was covered with 2 or 3 layers. Greg, you want to show that next picture? This is typically, that's what the powerhouse looks like. All of those pipes and those turbines, everything, asbestos all over the place. That's what our guys were doing. The high pressure steam lines turned a large turbine which created electricity. The turbine, usually a General Electric or Westinghouse turbine, had to be completely covered with asbestos pipe covering and black and blankets. During the erection of a new unit of the powerhouse, there would be 100 to 200 asbestos workers at the height of a job, and the total number of building trades members present in a powerhouse would be up to 2,000 men. There would be boilermakers, pipe fitters, bricklayers, electricians, millwrights, laborers, and a host of other unions. Asbestos dust would be in the men's hair, in their cuffs, on their clothes, in their shoes, inside their shirts and coveralls. If you sprinkled a container of talcum powder all over your hair and arms and socks and clothes, you'd have some idea what these fellas looked like. So now you know a little bit about the work that we did with insulation that contained asbestos. So how has this odorless and tasteless mineral affected some of our membership and their families? This picture here, this is Veronica and Eddie O'Shea. And they were, and they're from Chicago. They're actually contemporaries of my mom and dad. So I knew them real well. They were around the house when I was growing up, when I was a little kid. And Eddie was a pipe cover from Local 17 in Chicago. So was his brother George. He was a pipe cover from Local 17 in Chicago as well. Though my dad did not contract mesothelioma, he died of complications of asbestosis and lung cancer, as did my mom. But back to the O'Sheas. Veronica, shown here, she was a great talker. She helped a lot of people. She was a volunteer crossing guard. And her husband, Eddie, was a decorated veteran of World War II and was a member of Local 17, as I said. Okay. And this is the kind of work our guys did. Eddie and his brother George worked at many of the powerhouses, refineries, and steel mills near Chicago. Eddie and George would come home like my dad, all dusty from a day's work. Veronica, like my mom and many spouses in the 50s and 60s, would wash her husband's clothes. When you washed an asbestos worker's clothes, even after shaking them out, it left a ring of caked insulation in the washing machine. After her autopsy, Veronica's lung tissue was submitted to asbestos fiber analysis by Dr. Rogley at Duke University Medical Center. By simple light microscope, over 7,000 coated asbestos fibers per gram were found in her lung tissue, when normal was 20 such coated fibers. By a special and more powerful scanning electron microscope, over 24,000 coated bodies per gram were found, and an additional 40,000 uncoated fibers were found per gram in her lungs. Dr. Rogley concluded that Veronica's lung tissue showed she had the equivalent of an occupational exposure to asbestos just from washing her husband's overalls. Today, even the daughters of our members are contracting asbestos disease, including mesothelioma, just from living in the home of their fathers who were asbestos workers. This past year, Veronica and Ed's daughter, my cousin, was diagnosed with non-malignant asbestos-related condition on her lungs. Also in this past year, George O'Shea's daughter, another cousin of mine, was diagnosed with mesothelioma, just from living in the home of an asbestos worker as a little girl. Last year, another daughter of one of our members had just died of mesothelioma. She was 44 years young, with two young daughters, one who hadn't even completed high school. So this deadly disease of mesothelioma is moving to yet another generation today, daughters of asbestos workers, some of whom are young mothers. Contemporaries. I would like to tell you about three of our contemporaries who were recently diagnosed with mesothelioma and take you through a few quick pictures that'll show you how they were exposed. Tom Walsh, Jimmy Kearns, and Chick Schill are contemporaries of ours who have recently been diagnosed with mesothelioma. Tom was the son of one of our leaders from St. Louis. Jimmy was a decorated veteran of Vietnam conflict in the Chicago area, and Chick was a business manager of one of our locals in Iowa. These guys were all in their 50s. They're all in their 50s. Last year when I gave a talk similar to this, Tom, Jimmy, and Chick were still with us. Recently, Tom and Chick have passed away, and Jimmy is still holding his own. So even as I tell you this story of ours from decades ago, I stand here with you today to try to find a cure for effective treatment for mesothelioma and asbestos-induced cancer and disease. A few more pictures. One of the jobs our members did was to cover the steam lines that were 24 inches in diameter with asbestos pipe covering and cement. And this is, though Tom, Jimmy, and Chick's exposure to asbestos was during the 1960s. Many of our members who are contracting mesothelioma first started in the trade in the 50s. We have heard that researchers and scientists are interested in data-first exposure. For people being diagnosed with mesothelioma today, we now know that it can take 20, 30, even 40 years or more from first exposure to contract mesothelioma. For a daughter of an asbestos worker born in the 50s, the date of first exposure to asbestos was probably the day she returned home from the delivery room to live in her father's house. Asbestos pipe covering, you got one more there for me? This is an interesting picture, and I just want to tell you, because this will kind of put things in perspective. They're talking about this asbestos thing, this asbestos bill with 1%. We don't use this asbestos like we did. This is a 50-pound bag, and if this current asbestos bill goes through, if you had a bag like this, a half a pound of it could be asbestos. That is totally unacceptable. Okay. Asbestos pipe covering, black cement, and asbestos joint compound were still being actively used on the job sites in the mid to late 70s in Chicago. Many workers and their families at home were exposed to asbestos when they knocked tons of asbestos pipe covering and black off the job sites to make room for the asbestos-free product. It was not until the 1980s that safer work practices with respect to removing asbestos came into favor for active use. It is certainly a tragedy that people are still contracting mesothelioma, but it appears that this tragedy will continue for decades as a result of past exposures. We still have to suffer through the uncertainty of our membership and the family members who first exposure came in the 50s. So any pipe cover, anybody, any construction worker really that was around that stuff, they're a ticking time bomb. And it sneaks up on you, and now we're doing the stuff with the medical screening and stuff, and you have to know and see this, just a short time ago, there weren't conferences like this. There weren't good doctors working on this. There weren't places to turn, so we collectively, the Asbestos Workers Union, we tip our hard hats to all of you. We are hopeful that the medical and scientific community can develop new methods of treating this awful disease called mesothelioma and other diseases caused by asbestos exposure. We will join the good physicians from around the world who have come to Detroit this week and find effective treatments and hopefully a cure for asbestos disease, and in particular mesothelioma. We know that the problem of asbestos exposure and the cancer it causes many decades later is not limited to the United States. Workers in developing countries and other parts of the globe are being needlessly exposed to asbestos products that are virtually banned in other parts of the world. We will join with others to stop this deadly exposure to victimize the unsuspecting and the powerless. I would like to leave you with a couple things that my dad told me when I was growing up. You know, and you guys, and I got to tell you, you guys would all like my dad. He was just a little guy, you know, and he worked in all these places and came home. That's all he wanted to do. All he wanted to do, you know, was take care of his family, you know. And I always refer to the pipe covers as little pipe covers, you know, because we're the smallest union. But I also think of my dad, too. He was like a little guy. He told me one time, you know, when I was a kid, the only people that he didn't get along with were job runners and my mother, his wife, you know. And they were married until they both passed away. But the first thing he said, it doesn't cost anything to be nice, so I've tried to follow that advice the best I could. Second, he told me, if you're lucky, you might have 2 friends in this life that you can count on, so treasure them. I am lucky to count many of you in this room as my friends, and for those of you who I don't personally know, I consider you my friend in the fight to find an effective treatment and cure for asbestos disease, including mesothelioma. We wish you all a great stay in Detroit and wish you a safe return home to your family and friends. And may God bless all of you and your family. Thank you.